We would like to welcome everybody again, friends and family. We definitely are understanding of all the questions and the responses that we've got regarding the CARES Act and the FFR or CRA questions. And we wanted to go through another presentation that specifically deals with the business aspect and more specifically the SBA loans. So we are going to go through another question and answer like we did on the one previous to this. And we would like to make sure that we're addressing all the questions. So if you received this and you didn't get your questions answered, we'd encourage you to email back after you've received this and let us know about more questions that you might have. So we're going to start the presentation. One of the things that we've always got to do is just tell you that this doesn't constitute legal advice. And it really is for information and educational purposes. The issues that we're dealing with are so complex that we don't have all of the laws fully defined on this. Obviously, consult whoever you use at Atlas or another professional advisor, and make sure that you double check the newest, greatest, because we'll be coming out with some new updates to this as we go. And as we do that, understand that we're trying to provide you the most timely information, which on this slide in this presentation may contain some errors. We don't think so, but we want to make sure that you understand that it's not perfect right now because we're waiting on new legislation to come out. And I'm going to turn it over to Fran to get us kicked off with the agenda.
All right, thanks, Lonnie. And by the way, by way of introductions, the voice that you just heard was Lonnie Woodley. He's the managing partner for Atlas. My name is Fran Coet. I'm in Atlas Westminster office. We're also going to be joined by Nitin Gupta, who is the head of the Arizona offices for Atlas. He's in Phoenix. And Eric Reineman, who's in my part of the world. He's in the Denver Tech Center office, and he'll be joining us as well. We all recognize at Atlas the grieving process that we're all going through. What our nation is experiencing is unprecedented, and you hear those terms, unprecedented, never happened before. So collectively, we're dealing with that. At Atlas, we want to use our knowledge, our connections, whatever they may be, to help you go through this process and hopefully see light at the end of the tunnel. This is not going to be a forever situation. The government has enacted several pieces of legislation to try to buffer some of this grieving process and some of what's happening in our economy and to us personally. In this, as Lonnie said, we are going to talk about the SBA provisions, specifically the provisions that are geared to our small business owners. It is such a heavy heart to watch our clients have to shutter their businesses, their employees, and I think the government's trying to address that heavy-heartedness by offering some financial assistance to make it through these very trying times. And again, whatever Atlas can do, whatever our professionals can do to try to help you make it through this labyrinth of trouble, we're offering to do that, certainly by doing this, this broadcast today. So Lonnie, if you wouldn't mind, would you give us kind of a review of what it is the federal government and the local governments have been putting together for us?
Yeah, there's a lot of legislation that is being placed in front of us, obviously with response to the various issues that have come up with the coronavirus. And they've started with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and we refer to that as the 6201. And then they follow that up with the CARES Act. Overall, they're trying to address individuals, they're trying to address businesses, and they're trying to address businesses in a way of providing some more funds to them through the form of a loan that actually would have some potential debt forgiveness. So we have set up our presentations like that. We first did an individual. We are also doing a business presentation. And then this third one is really about small business loans and the whole various loan programs that are out there. So we took the questions that you had and we put them into this presentation, and we will try to answer them to the best of our ability. Yeah, so we talked about the phase one approach, and that approach was really about what they refer to as personal professional equipment for our frontline people. They've tried to fund that as quickly as possible. Then they went to phase two, which was the family first that we talked about, and it really talked about individuals and a rebate and some payroll tax credits. And then the CARES Act, which included the Paycheck Protection Program that we'll talk about and some other deferments. Where this presentation is really intended to focus on the SBA lending opportunities. We've also been told that there is already in process a phase four, but we're hesitant on even trying to make statements about that because we do not know what Congress has anticipated for phase four. I think the big thing right now is we do want to go through this in a conversation standpoint. So we will have people asking questions and people answering questions. So we'll go ahead and kick it off.
Well, Lonnie, I'm very grateful for your expertise with this. I'm a tax person, but we have small business clients throughout Atlas that are really hurting right now. And so they've furnished us with a series of questions that we would like to respond to. Certainly we've been answering them as they've been coming in, but generally if one small business has a question, they all have the same question, right? Right. So start out with what the basic loans are that are available to a business.
Yeah, there are really two different programs, and they're distinctly different, and you have to understand, we'll talk more about each one of them individually, but there's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and that one is really similar to what's happened in the past. It's not a new program. When there were hurricanes or there were various other disaster areas, those were the loans that people did apply for, and they went directly through the SBA. This one hasn't changed. It's the same. They are talking about relaxing some of the requirements, but right now it is the same, and you do apply directly through the SBA. There's a website that you would go to. The other one is the Paycheck Protection Program loans, which that one actually is handled through financial institutions. And that one actually has a few extra benefits to it. One of them being the potential forgiveness, which we'll get into in more detail. The other one is they've loosened some of the requirements. There is not a personal guarantee required. There are specific calculations of how much you can get for that loan. And there's specific calculations for how much you could have forgiven. Some people refer to that as a grant, but it really is a forgiveness that they have already contemplated and put into the legislation.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I know some people want to think that this is just a government giveaway, but these truly are loans. The companies are going to incur debt, but there may be provisions for how they pay it back or if or when they pay it back. Is that right? That's
correct. There are specific provisions in the economic injury disaster loans. That will be, generally speaking, a loan that's paid back without forgiveness. In the Paycheck Protection Program loans, there is an opportunity for partial or 100% forgiveness. And after that, once the forgiveness, if there's no amount remaining, then there will be a payment that they're telling us will not be longer than a 10-year and a less than a 4% payback. Nice. Okay. But we always want to caution our clients, they don't want to borrow more than they should.
but what they need, that's what the government is offering. So how do we begin the process? I think you mentioned that for the emergency provisions, that's a direct SBA, but where else can we go to find information and apply for these loans?
To start with, I mean, you have to understand what they're going to be used for. And one of the cautions that we would have is that you cannot apply or you cannot receive the one loan for the same cause. So what I'm saying there is if you do apply for the economic injury disaster loans, then, and you receive funds, you cannot receive funds from the PPP loans. And what we're encouraging clients to do is actually to start with the Paycheck Protection Program loans, because that actually it has more benefit to you with the forgiveness and also the lack of personal guarantee. Those loans, you want to go to your bank and you want to apply through them. We have the documents that we've seen that are in draft form still. As of today, we were told they are still in draft form. They hope to have the final ones by Friday, which is April 3rd. But the PPP loans are all directly through financial institutions. And one of the questions we had was, is it through a qualified SBA lender or other banks? And they are opening up the lending opportunity through other banks, but those banks do still have to comply with SBA requirements, which may or may not be difficult. That's up to the financial institution, but you can start with talking to your local banker, or we have some banks that we have arranged with to hopefully make it easier for you to get these loans faster.
Well, and speed seems to be of the essence. So I'm going to take you off the hook for a minute and talk to Nitin. Nitin, what if the company's already laid off their employees? Do they have to hire them back to qualify for this PPE loan?
So with regard to that, I would say that they don't necessarily have to hire them back with regard to this loan. However, to the extent they want to utilize the forgiveness portion of this loan, they would need to hire these people back or others. The PPP loan that Lonnie talked about earlier, that is really driven by the want of the government to keep the unemployment low and get money in the pocket of the businesses and get them to continue to pay these people. But the fact that some of the business have to get rid of people in order to be able to keep the cash flow or deal with the shortage of the cash flow. Once they get the PPP loan, if they hire these people back or hire others and continue to maintain the same levels of salaries, wages, payments, or expenses, it will help them with the forgiveness portion of that loan. It is encouraged that businesses hire those people back and continue to pay them now that the government's giving them the money to be able to pay them.
And I truly believe our small business owners think of their employees as part of their family or extended family. So I think if they're given the ability to do that and the reserves to do that through this loan program, that they'll probably try to bring them back as quickly as possible. I have a client, Nitin, that has a hair salon, and she financed that purchase of the business and of her building through an SBA loan. She's had to shutter her business since the middle of March, the last couple of weeks or so. And is there any way that she doesn't have to make those SBA loan payments on an existing loan?
Absolutely. One of the provisions in there is a deferral of payments on the existing SBA loans and the student loans. So it's our understanding that as it stands right now, the SBA will likely pay these payments directly to the banks for anywhere between 3 and 6 months, most likely up to the full 6-month period, so that our clients, the taxpayers, the business owners don't have to make those payments. And I think would be great because they get to preserve the cash and their loan payments are being made in the meantime. We're still waiting for guidance and clarity on what happens. Is that 6-month completely forgiven, or is it added to the back end of the loan, or what the treatment will be? But as it stands right now, from what we gather, SBA will make those payments directly to the bank or defer them for up to a 6-month period.
Well, and it seems like on any of these provisions, it's very fluid, and we're simply trying to offer the best information that's available today, the 1st of April, on these provisions.
I would highly recommend that everybody who does have an existing SBA loan get in touch with the loan servicer and start to request this relief and at least get the process started, because as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of people trying to do this. And they are these loan servicers are likely in a similar situation as us. They just don't have enough information on it yet.
Well, and of course, they've had to reconfigure how their workforce is dealing with people. They're dealing remotely from their homes if they have to care for children. It's put a stress on all of our systems to try to meet the needs of those who are requiring our help, right?
That's right.
For that, I think that's a good piece of advice to the business owners that do have SBA loans to contact their servicers. And again, they're trying to figure out how those payments are going to work. But just being able to retain your cash reserves and not make those loan payments for a period of time is going to help the businesses get back on their feet faster.
Correct.
So Lonnie, what if I was in the pipeline already for an SBA loan? I'd applied for one before these new provisions came out. Am I going to go back to the loan guarantees, or this is going to be switched over to the new SBA loan process?
So prior to even today, the only loan that you could have officially applied for was the economic injury disaster loans. They are not, the SBA is not taking applications yet for the PPP loans. And with the economic injury disaster loans, those processes have changed. It's very funny because we've had clients go on and they've applied online and then they took the online application down. We did it, now it's back up. The requirements haven't changed on the economic injury disaster loans. As of what we know right now, they're talking about laxing them. But what you had there, if they've introduced new forms, they will have to be still completed. But that's a whole different process than the PPP loans. And those PPP loans are actually, like we mentioned earlier, through a bank. Some banks may have different requirements, but for the most part, the requirements are that you were in business in February, that you have 500 or fewer employees, and you don't have to prove that you have economic loss because you were in business at that time, so that's somewhat assumed. And now we're just waiting for the final process. Like Fran mentioned earlier, that I believe there are forms out there, but they're still in draft form. And we talked about briefly the fact that the banks are still waiting on the final forms from the SBA. So until they have those, there's really been no PPP loans processed or applied for. But like Nitin was saying earlier, it makes sure that you do talk to a banker to get this process started. Because the sooner you get it started, the quicker you're going to get it.
And again, time seems to be of the essence. However, we need to wait 5 minutes for the next iteration of the form or direction or the new website or whatever. So to the degree that our clients can, they need to kind of breathe through this and let it take its course.
This thing, SBA is supposed to start taking applications starting Friday, which is a couple of days from today. And a draft form of that loan application itself wasn't even available to anybody until 3 p.m. Arizona time yesterday, which is when it got released by the Treasury and the SBA. So it's a very fluid situation, moving really fast with a lot of information still to come, which is going to come really fast.
Now, I hope that means we're going to see the other side of this really fast.
Yeah, that's the expectation. Banks that we've been in touch with, the different personnel who are, sitting in good positions, decision maker type of positions in these banks, that's what they're saying, that their goal is once they've got some clarity on the requirements and the list of things that are needed and the process, they intend to move through this really fast because everybody realizes that our clients, the business owners, they need help and they need help now.
Which brings us, Lonnie, to the expected timeline. If you can give us any kind of parameters as to what our clients can expect once we have official forms and guidelines, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, and we just, like Nitin said earlier, we're talking to a lot of SBA lenders who have better knowledge of the SBA loan process than we do. And the documents that'll be required are extremely limited on the PPP loans. What we understand right now, it's just, again, prove that you're in business, and that could be your operating agreement. They will want to see a financial statement for near year end, and then there might be some payroll requirements to prove what the maximum amount of the loan is. But beyond that, once they have that information and the application completed, we were told that these are going to be processed quickly. Now, I'll give you a time frame, but I don't know that we can hold any bank to this time frame because we don't know the volume that the SBA will be dealing with, because the SBA has to sign off on this. But they said once it's completed and they say they have all the information, they're talking 5 to 10 days, which is an extremely fast process for the SBA. It generally doesn't happen that fast. So
with any type of a loan. So they are treating this as an emergency, trying to get the cash into the people that need it.
correct. And they also have other options that are even faster, but they really need to have that that ferreted out some more too with the express loan. But the express loan is really more of an express grant, and it's up to $10,000 that you can get for immediate needs. I know we've talked with other banks, and some larger banks are actually doing even express loans on their own without even going through the SBA. So in that case, you want to talk to your banker if you need something quicker than what the SBA process is going to be. But I will go back and say, that SBA process, if they really do get through it in the 5 to 10 days, is faster than any other SBA process that we have seen for our clients.
From what we hear, these express loans are truly that. They're essentially credit-based, the borrower credit-based, and not a lot of paperwork required for those. So that the banks are turning around fairly quickly, in a lot of cases, less than a week.
Is that the $10,000 express line of credit? Is that the maximum?
As of right now, that is the maximum that they could receive, and it actually is in the form of more of a grant that will not be required to be paid back as we know it right now.
Nice. That'll help to keep the lights on and the security system functional too, I suppose. Are there different loans for businesses that are designated as 8A or minority-owned type of businesses? 8A is a governmental designation, is that correct?
So they do have those programs, but any of the changes as it relates to these new different types of loan programs and grant programs, we haven't seen anything special come out on those, other than we did see some mention about some allocation of the funding to the minority businesses, but really there is not much clarity around any of those rules that we've come across so far.
Okay, so nothing in particular for their needs. They're just kind of in the queue with everybody else. Is that right?
That is correct.
So Nitin, kind of going on with some of the questions we have been given, what happens if a small business gets a loan and then they still can't keep it together? This lasts longer than anybody expected and they have to close, or in the case of my hair salon client, they had to shutter their business simply because the governor said no haircuts, no nails being done, that kind of thing. We're all going to know the true color of everybody's hair, right? Because none of us can go to the hair salon. What happens if they sell the business? What circumstances are very fluid, as we've talked about. What happens then?
It's a great question because we don't know what the future is going to bring. And the intent behind doing these loans is to continue to help the businesses keep their doors open. However, there's not much guidance around what happens if the business is closed or shut down or even sold. In general, from what we're gathering, it appears that to the extent you've utilized the funds, you can still prove that any of the PPP loan money that you received, you've utilized that towards the qualified expenditures within the provisions of the law, then you're not held liable to pay those back anyway. Now, that's just a take based on and read, that is not the law. So we don't know the answer for that. And something related to selling of the business is definitely yet to be seen in terms of how the SBA is going to want to handle that piece. We have not seen any guidance on that part yet.
And the thing that we can always encourage people to do is just stay open, have an open communication line with your lender, especially when it comes to PPP, and just follow the rules because it's intended to help businesses stay in business. And if that's your intent, that's what you can use it for. And like Nitin said, there's a forgiveness that's attached to the PPP loans, and just spend the money according to the requirements, and maybe the loan will get forgiven also. We know there's difficult times ahead, but there is a bright side coming out the other end. And we hope that most businesses do make it through this.
Well, it sounds like we accountants are going to be busy for a very long time if our businesses have got to prove how they spent the money. What if they take these stimulus loans and keep their employees, keep the lights on, keep the doors open? Are they going to have to pay back the loan, or is it treated as a grant? And can you kind of explain that?
So in general, to the extent the PPP loan money is used for the qualifying expenditures like payroll, employee benefits, payroll taxes, rent, utilities, mortgage interest, to the extent this is utilized for those types of items, you don't have to pay it back. It effectively converts into a grant because it becomes a forgivable loan. But to the extent you are forced to reduce your salary over the next 8 weeks after getting the loan, and you spend less money towards that, or you don't spend enough money towards the qualified expenditures, it does convert into a loan which you are responsible to pay back.
Well, I'm trying to think from my accountant brain about how the businesses are going to track what they spent from where. So they're probably going to have to impact their accounting records with this loan, correct? And then track the proceeds of the loan as they're spending it. Does that make sense?
Correct. That's correct. And the intent should be the money going towards those expenditures is first coming from this loan, so that it can be documented that that's where this money went.
So more work for us accountants, right?
Absolutely.
Stay busy with this. So what are the downsides of taking out these loans?
You know, frankly, I haven't seen a downside yet for taking out these loans, other than the fact that if you don't need the money and you're sitting in a pretty good cash flow position, then all you're doing is adding additional debt to yourself. Unless that's the case, I really don't see a downside to taking these loans, because in any portion of the loan that's utilized towards the qualified expenditures becomes a grant effectively, or a forgiven loan. And any portion that is not spent that way ends up becoming a loan that you can pay back over a period of time. And it can be up to 10 years, but SBA is going to make that decision based on what they see. So frankly, if your financial position is still pretty good, uh, the SBA is going to give you a much, much shorter payback period on that. But aside from that, there is really no downside to this, for the funds that are available.
Well, and we recognize the fact that some clients are debt adverse. It is a debt. It is a loan, like Fran was mentioning earlier, and like Nitin said, there is a forgivable portion, but you may end up with debt if you didn't have it before. The issue is, do you have injury? Did you suffer because of this? The government is making that available to help compensate for suffering and some of the rules that they put on us from a business perspective. So yeah, there's really not a lot of downside, but there's people that do not want to take loans out. I think one of the other downsides just to consider is the fact that you do have to go through a process to get this loan. Not as detailed as some others, but are sometimes not really interested in going through that process with the SBA and the lender.
Well, and as I mentioned, I think you've got the ongoing accounting for how you're spending the money, when that's the last thing that you want to be thinking about. You kind of get into triage mode. So there's another downside there with just the additional accounting and tracking of the funds. So I think Nitin, you had a kind of a best case. Well, there'd be money left over. They're going to open their doors back up in a couple months. We've all seen the graphs with the curves, and that's beyond me to figure out. But what if this lasts a lot longer than anybody expected?
That's a great question, Fran, and it's on everybody's mind right now, including the federal government and the SBA. As it stands right now, and even the PPP loan money, the provisions, once you get it, you got to spend it over the next 8 weeks on the expenditures. So, they kind of expect to be short term as well. And really, what happens 8 weeks later if this thing extends out, nobody knows. And one of the possibility is this $350 billion that have been allocated to this, those have already run out over the next 8 weeks. People have already used it, put it back into their companies, and now they're standing in the same spot that they were today. We're all very hopeful, and the government has put out indications, even through the press, in a lot of the stuff that we read every day or hear about every day. They are prepared to do whatever it takes to continue to help the businesses and the people and the economy. And that's really part of where this phase 4 is being talked about, that there is possibility of a phase 4. What and how much of it will it include is yet to be determined, based on how the next few weeks sort of go in terms of the activity in the economy and out there in the marketplace.
And I think that presents the issue of the urgency, although I'm sure the 4 of us would agree that we hope they wait at least a couple of weeks before they do another piece of legislation. We've got to be able to digest this and help our clients get this immediate support, and then hopefully circle back to what comes next. And maybe there won't be a what comes next. We'll see the sunshine, and all will be good. Lonnie, what are the specifics about the potential for forgiveness of these loans? We've kind of danced around that or making it a grant. Are there specific criteria?
There are, and this really, as we stated earlier, applies to the PPP loans, so the Paycheck Protection Program, and it's specifically spelled out in the Act. First of all, when you do obtain the loan, the money is intended to be used for payroll, like Nitin said earlier, payroll, benefits, rent, utilities. And what happens is that after you've received that loan, if you spend the money on those items for the next 8 weeks, there's a calculation that includes those items to determine the amount that would be forgiven. There's also a requirement that has to do with how much of your labor force did you retain, hire back, or keep. And if in the general terms, there's more specifics to this, but in the general terms, if you retain at least 75% of your employees and the payroll, then you may not have a reduction of that forgiveness. But if it goes below that, then the forgiveness could be reduced, even if you had the money spent on specific items that are in that list that we shared earlier. So Fran talked about having the calculation done. That is one of the things when you do get this loan that you have to be aware of, that you're going to have to provide evidence of how you spent the money. They're even talking about providing the payrolls, providing the leases that were signed before the loan was provided, providing utility bills to verify that you actually spent it on that, on those specific items. But if you do and you follow rules, then you can get a forgiveness up to 100% of the principal. There could be a reduction of that. If there is something that you don't get 100% forgiven, then it's on the terms that we talked about earlier, over a minimum or maximum of 10 years and no greater than a 4% rate.
Okay, and so that kind of addresses the interest rate, no more than 4%, which is pretty reasonable when we're talking about commercial paper. That's a pretty low rate. And the terms that we can expect for repayment, I think we talked about those earlier too. What are those?
Yeah, it's just it's going to be over no more than a 10-year period and at 4%. So you'd be amortizing whatever remaining balance you have over that no more than 10 years. They don't give specific guidance of if they're going to say, no, you need to pay this back in 3 years or 5 years. The maximum will be 10 years is all we're seeing right now, and it won't be greater than 4%. It could be less than 4%, and it could be less than 10 years.
Excellent. Well, and just depend upon how they're using the money and what their individual circumstances are. But right now, we're just interested in getting cash to the small businesses so they can continue. Nitin, do the part-time or seasonal employees count for these payroll relief loans? What about foreign employees?
So foreign employees, any employees outside of the U.S. jurisdiction who don't have their residence in the U.S. do not count towards eligible payroll. But everybody else does who is a resident of the United States, whether they're part-time, whether they're seasonal, all of them, the wages paid to all of them does count towards these payroll relief loans.
But I think to expand on that just a little bit, there are more than just employees that would count for eligible payroll costs, even independent contractors or people who get paid compensation in a different way. You might have a partner that gets a guaranteed payment. To best of our knowledge, that is considered part of the payroll costs.
Lonnie, I think I heard or read somewhere that if it's an independent contractor, those applications are going to show up maybe a little later than the initial applications for this loan. Is that true?
The borrower, if they're applying for the loan, then the borrower that is outside of an entity could be an independent contractor, could be somebody who files a Schedule C or a sole proprietor. we're not certain that there's going to be a difference in those loan applications, but they are all eligible to receive the benefit of a PPP loan. When it comes to what is considered payroll cost, if a business did pay an independent contractor, then that can be included in the payroll cost to get to a maximum loan amount.
It can, okay. Well, there are some of our clients, some of Atlas clients that have maybe a cleaning service or something that uses independent contractors and full-time employees or part-time employees, kind of a mix. So they would include payments to all of those as part of the pushback to make a grant out of this rather than a loan. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, realize please that there is more guidance to come on that, and it could happen to where some specific services are excluded. And I'll give you another question just as something to think about that we've been thinking about and we don't have the answer. Qualified use of the money as payment of utilities. Well, what is the definition of utilities? Is the cleaning crew a part of the utility? We don't know. Are the cleaning supplies a part of the utilities? We don't know. Generally, when we're talking utilities, we're thinking electricity, water, trash, sewer, those types of things, telephone. But there is some clarity to come. So we've got these, they're simple terms, but they're really broad terms as it sits right now, because we'll find out the definition of the treatment of all of these as time goes by. And frankly, what we're trying to ask clients to do is focus on obtaining the PPP loan right now, focus on doing what needs to happen to get the money, keep the doors open, keep the cash flowing to the employees. And then the other part of it, the forgivable, is it forgivable or not? Is it a grant or not? Is it a loan? How long does it get paid over? We'll worry about that 4 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. For now, the focus should be, how can we get it? How can we get the most to be able to stay open for the longest period of time?
Well, and I certainly have the impression that if, say, the janitorial service that had independent contractors, now those independent contractors can actually go apply for unemployment benefits, and you wouldn't want this duplication where those contract labor people are drawing unemployment at the same time they're being paid by the business as an independent contractor. And that's a conflict that is always in a situation like this. But I think the government's trying to do the right thing, putting some stops in place. Do you agree?
That's right. They're trying to avoid as much duplication as they can from the get-go, but there's going to be some duplications. What's going to happen and how, the same janitorial person can go apply for unemployment based on the earnings they've had, but this client is getting a PPP loan for that piece also to try and continue to keep them employed. And who knows if that janitorial service provider as an independent contractor has his own subcontractors, they're trying to go out and get PPP as well for themselves. So there's going to be some overlap somewhere. Hopefully over time, it all sort of gets flushed out.
Now, speaking of unemployment, what if our clients have had employees that have applied for unemployment? Is that going to hurt those clients in this SBA loan process?
So we don't know a lot about that as it stands right now, because the Department of Economic Security has not updated the information related to that. I will quickly talk about how it works in general. In general, when unemployment is claimed, it does impact the unemployment rate for the employer. So the unemployment insurance payment may go up, but will this time period be excluded from an increase? We don't know. Whether there'll be an additional impact because the unemployment benefits have been increased by $600 a week because of the federal mandate, Is that going to have a bigger impact? We don't know. We don't think that piece will happen, but it's all an unknown right now. That's one area where we're waiting for additional guidance. But from applying from a loan perspective, it's not going to hurt them at all, because the whole idea is if they've already had to lay off some people, then they can get this loan, get the money, and bring those people back to work. So them having applied for unemployment is not going to hurt the employer.
Understood. Well, this obviously is a client question, and since they're stressed already, they want to know how much it would cost for Atlas to help them apply for these loans.
So applying for these loans is really not much. You do realize that there's a lot of time and effort and energy and work that's going to go into this to be able to put the different things together, talk to the different lenders, talk to the clients back and forth, help put all of this information together. So we don't expect the cost to be a lot, but it's going to be hard to say, because it's going to be dependent upon the time and nature of the work involved. So, and if you're talking about a manufacturing company with 80 employees and a nice big chart of accounts with a lot of activity, would be a little more, it would take a little more to help them with this than it would one of those independent contractor, janitorial employees, small ones that we talked about. So it'll strictly be based upon the circumstances and the facts.
As is always the case when we're preparing a tax return or doing bookkeeping or whatever. Basically, our inventory is our time, and so if it takes more time for one client, it's going to cost them a bit more, and vice versa. If it's a small ask, like a copy of a tax return, that'll happen pretty quickly, right?
Correct.
Great. Okay. So Lonnie, I'll go back to you again. Does the SBA lending cover lost revenues? I didn't hear that. I was hearing more it's helping with costs like employee wages, rent, et cetera.
Right. I think when you talk about lost revenue, you're talking about an injury of some sort. And this is not intended for any business to have to claim that injury. They're already making the presumption that they were in business when this happened, so they're injured. And it's very specific to specific cost. And like we've talked about, it's about keeping the business in business and keeping the employees employed. So it doesn't necessarily have specifics around lost revenues. It is very specific around employee wages and how the actual maximum loan amount is calculated, and then how the forgiveness is calculated.
Well, and speaking to that, we have many of our clients that operate as S corporations or C corporations, and corporations pay dividends. S corporations pay S corporation dividend or distributions out to the shareholders. Are there prohibitions about taking the money and paying dividends out to owners or making S corporation distributions to the shareholders?
So today, there are very limited restrictions on how you use maybe cash you continue to get. There are restrictions, and they do talk about specifically when you get the loan, what is the loan utilized for? But if you have cash sitting around, there's no provision that says you cannot pay dividends or distributions to owners. I would encourage, like we talked before, is that you track the money that you got under the PPP loan specifically and be able to show that you've paid wages, or you've paid the rents, or you've paid utilities, or you've paid benefits. Now, one of the things that we're fairly clear on is that if an owner takes a guaranteed payment or some other type of compensation like distributions, we believe that can be included and be utilized, but there is a limit to that also. The amount that can be paid to any one individual that would qualify for a forgiveness, or even in the loan, the maximum loan amount is $100,000. And that's an annualized amount. It's not in that short period of time. But right now, to answer both those questions, there are no provisions that say you have to stop paying an owner through a dividend or distribution.
And actually, they have, like Lonnie mentioned earlier, they have really relaxed requirements with regard to this. So much so that one of the things we're noticing is that SBA is not even going to require a subordination of their existing debt to this debt. So this can go after any loans that the company has. Generally, in the past, we've seen SBA loans would require that before any existing loans are paid back, this loan would have to be paid back or anything like that. But it's really relaxed requirements for the PPP portion of this program.
Well, and that goes to the next question, Fran, because there's no personal guarantee requirement. Even in the point where they basically called it almost an unsecured loan that doesn't even need collateral. So they're really trying to make it easy for businesses to obtain these loans, because they're even talking in the act about, they waive the requirement of basically a big proof of payback, the ability to pay back, which is always a requirement in any other financing. And again, they're trying to loosen the requirements so that the companies can get the money and get it quickly.
Well, I believe people will do the right thing under the circumstances, but as we both all recognize, there are always some bad actors when you get into a disaster situation, and we hope that those bad actors don't take advantage of the situation, that the funds are used as they're intended to keep employees on payroll and keep the lights on and try to keep the business operating as well as it possibly can. As a kind of a wrap up, Lonnie and Nitin, do you have some recommendations to make for the clients? I think they've been sprinkled throughout this presentation, but it might be good to just kind of reiterate the timeliness, the need for the application, just all of those things.
I think our biggest recommendation is know that this is going to end. The whole coronavirus issue is going to end. And we want to make sure that everybody understands this is a way to make it through this and see a brighter future. I think the recommendation that Atlas would give is take advantage of the opportunity that the government has presented. The PPP loans seem to be the best opportunity to help your business right now. And honestly, it seems like it's the fastest that our government has ever acted on helping small businesses, which I think that's a great applause to our Congress and our president. And to have this available now is something that I think small to medium-sized businesses need. We've talked about them relaxing the requirements. So we would encourage everybody to seek out the benefit of the PPP loans. And if you need, if for whatever reason don't qualify for that, which is very difficult to not qualify for that, then there's always the other loan, that is the disaster recovery loan too.
And to that effect, I kind of don't want to put it this way, but I would anyway. PPP is the low-hanging fruit. PPP is the quickest way to get access to cash to keep the doors open for at least the next 8 weeks. And our recommendation is please go get that and get that now. Put money in your pocket, ease off the pressure a little bit, and let's get through the next 8 to 10 weeks utilizing that and your resources. And you'd asked a question earlier, Fran, what happens if this gets prolonged? One of the things to be looked at is the other program, which Lonnie mentioned, which is the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan portion, which is up to $2 million in loan, and it's a true loan at 3.75% rate of interest with an amortization period of possibly up to 30 years in terms of a payback. Very different requirements than the PPP does, but at least right now, that is plan B that is available assuming no phase 4 comes out. If a phase 4 comes out, that could potentially go in right behind the PPP program, and that may give some more relief to the businesses, and they can then go after the EIDL, because one of the big things behind the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan, is the taxpayers are going to have to be able to prove economic injury. They're going to have to be able to document that they've had loss of revenue, loss of business, which has caused this cash flow crunch. But if that is the case and all this is not helping, then 8, 10, 12 weeks from now, they will be able to document that there is economic injury, which will help with that EIDL loan. So there are things in place. There are options there. What appears to be the best option right now is the PPP loan with the EIDL as plan B, as backup.
We would always encourage you to be honest with your banker on the PPP. The economic injury disaster loan is definitely an option. Right now, they're saying that you can apply for both, or you can't receive benefit of both. But like Nitin's saying, if it extends longer, there's a great chance that they will probably open it up, or they'll have something else in phase 4 for our businesses. But our biggest recommendation: stay positive. We're gonna make it through it, and we just want everybody to come out stronger. Call us if you have any questions about this. Look at our website, see our website. It's atlascpas.com or atlasfirms.com, and you can see these updates and everything on. We have a specific coronavirus header that you can click on and go to a specific place that shows all of the documents that we have available. We'll continue to update that. We'll continue to send emails out. And you can follow us on all the social media. We're really striving to put everything out there so that you can help yourself make it through this.
I, for one, hope that there is not a phase 4. I hope that this is all in our memory banks in 8 to 10 weeks, and we're moving on to a bright summer and a great autumn season, and our ski resorts in Colorado open back up again, and all's right with the world. But
and we'll get to see if it works on TV.
Well, yes, or an angel rings a bell or something happens, whatever it is. Anyway, thanks for all your input. I appreciate it. And I hope those listening, if you have any other questions, please send them to us. We'll be happy to do another round. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.